Thank you for coming. I'm Stephen Rubenstein. I'm the chairman of ABNY. Really excited for today's program. We're excited to be doing this with the BORO Institute, so thank you, Grace. And we're grateful for AllianceBernstein. This is an incredible space, kind of like that moment where you come up in New York. Thank you for coming. I'm Stephen Rubenstein. I'm the chairman of ABNY. Really excited for today's program. We're excited to be doing this with the BORO Institute, so thank you, Grace. And we're grateful for AllianceBernstein. This is an incredible space, kind of like that moment where you come up in New York City and you see something you never knew existed. And so thank you for hosting us, AllianceBernstein. We're here today to talk about New York's affordability, especially for young families. I know that conversation mostly centers around housing. I think that's probably for a good reason. Housing's a place where like the playbook and the problem are so far apart that we clearly see it as a crisis. That said, taking care of children, our childcare, is not far behind. It is expensive for any of us. I have 3 little kids, and anybody knows you can take your entire paycheck or your mate's paycheck and more. And by the way, that's not unreasonable, right? Who do you want to pay better than the people who take care of our children? So I think the idea that you're trying to always push that down is also not reasonable for society. So we want New York City to be a place where families want to live, can afford to raise children, and it's been hard. There are programs like Head Start, expanded pre-K and 3K. They are definitely godsends, and the Madam's administration has made expanding free and low-cost childcare one of its big priorities. That said, we all know there are gaps. So we're fortunate to be here today with some of the foremost thought leaders, experts, and practitioners and officials anywhere in the country who focus on these issues. We're grateful to have them here today to talk about these issues in childcare and affordability. I know Councilmember Gutierrez is here. We're also grateful that I know Deputy Mayor Almanzar and Gail Brewer are going to be here too. And our panel today, we have 2 great people who are partners in this. One is Eliza Shapiro, oddly enough, my neighbor who was negotiating with me last weekend on could our nannies help each other out, who covers affordability for the New York Times and has had a stellar career as a journalist, and Grace Rauh from the BORO Institute. The BORO Institute has done incredible research in this area. We're grateful for partnering with them as ABNY. I want to turn the stage over to Grace Rauh. Thank you, Grace.
Thank you so much, Stephen, for that warm welcome. Thank you to Chad and Zena from the ABNY team, to AllianceBernstein for hosting us, to all of our panelists and speakers, and to all of you for coming out this morning. Childcare is an issue that doesn't just affect parents of young children in this city, but of course they are on the front lines of feeling the challenges and the crisis that the sector is facing right now in very real and immediate ways. But really, one of the things that we have tried to do at BORO is connect the childcare crisis to the broader health of our economy in New York. If we want the city to work, if we want to continue to attract people here and to keep them here once they come, we need to have an affordable childcare infrastructure in our city and also have childcare that is accessible for all the families that need it. So as Stephen said, I'm Grace Rauh. I'm the executive director of the BORO Institute. For those of you who don't know us, we're a relatively young organization. We launched in 2022, and we are a nonpartisan think tank that is solely focused on developing and advancing public policy solutions to tackle major challenges that are facing the city of New York. And that's how we ended up devoting so much attention to childcare. Last year, we released a major report outlining the challenges that this sector faces, and we also always want to come to the table with solutions. We developed a menu of policy reforms that are within the power of our leaders in government to adopt that would have an immediate impact on affordability and access to childcare. We know that New York, thankfully, is home to many important and influential childcare advocates, childcare providers, and we were so grateful to work with them and to help amplify their ideas in our report. But we also think that BORO and conversations and convenings like this with ABNY can bring more people into the conversation at a really critical time, which is so important, because fixing the challenges in our childcare sector is going to take a broad coalition. And That's why we've been doing outreach over the last year with business organizations and civic organizations in particular to try and bring more people to the table, teach them about the challenges that families are facing, child care providers are facing, and the impact on our city's economy. And this event really grew out of one of those conversations. Over the summer, BORO Institute and many ABNY members sat down to talk about our report, talk about solutions. And to ABNY's credit, they said, we want to do something more, and that's why we're all here today. I have now the great honor and privilege of welcoming up a very special speaker to set the stage for us, not just around what's happening in New York, but what's happening nationally when it comes to childcare. Reshma Saujani is the founder and CEO of Moms First. She's also the founder of Girls Who Code. She has spent more than a decade building movements to fight for women and girls' economic empowerment. She has been working to close the gender gap in the tech sector and fighting for structural changes that moms need and deserve, including affordable childcare and paid leave. She is also a parent, an employer, a New Yorker, and an old friend. Thank you, Reshma, for joining us.
Thank you so much. It's so great to be here. For all the women in the room, it's hot in here. You're not having a hot flash. I had to tell myself that twice. So thank you, Grace. It is so wonderful to be here. And thank you to ABNY and BORO. And thanks to all of you. This event was sold out. And there's nothing more than I like than a sold out event on childcare. So like most New Yorkers, I think New York City is like the greatest city in the world. What makes us so great is that we build exceptional things. We create exceptional things, like the Oreo, the Waldorf salad, ATMs and air conditioners, and of course, hip hop. And to be honest, that exceptionalism is what inspired me to run for office twice. I ran twice, I lost twice. That's another story for another time. But I ran because I wanted to build exceptional things. And during one of those races, I went to a New York City school, or several of them, and I'd walk into their computer science classrooms, and I said to myself, like, where are the girls? And so in an office just, quite frankly, a few blocks from here, I built Girls Who Code with the goal of closing the gender gap in tech. And over the past 10 years, we taught 700,000 girls to code in the US and reached more than 1 billion through our work. And what we did over the past decade is we literally flipped the percentage of women who are graduating in computer science from 12% to 50%. We did that together, and we did it here in New York. And so I saw firsthand how an idea can start in New York and literally take over the world. I saw how that you can build a model of innovation that other states, nations, and worlds replicate. But when it comes to childcare, we are far from leading. In fact, the only example we are setting is how you put working families last. I don't have to tell you, but New York families were not all right, and the data just proves it out. 1 out of every 4 New Yorkers today can't afford essentials. I'm talking about housing, food, basic things. And that's double the national average. And if you don't want to compare us to other cities, fine. Let's just compare us to ourselves. The poverty rates in New York City today are the highest they have ever been. We're seeing record numbers of homelessness. 1 out of 8 kids in my son's school at PS 11 are homeless. So I want to ask all of us as New Yorkers, is this the kind of leader we want to be? No, this is a crisis. And in a city with so much damn wealth, it's humiliating. It's an embarrassment. But as an entrepreneur, I see it as something else. I see it as a challenge because, you know, it doesn't have to be this way. Childcare doesn't have to be so broken. And we know that. That's why we're here. And we might not have all the answers to solving poverty and building a middle class and repopulating our city, but we do have the answer to one, childcare. So if you remember one thing from today's conversation, I want you to remember that childcare, not housing, is the linchpin to economic security. Because without childcare, working families can't work. Let me explain. So childcare is crushingly expensive, both in New York and all across the country. Just like in all 50 states, childcare far exceeds the cost of rent. And if you live in New York City, that's saying something. The vast majority of New York families with children under the age of 5, more than 80% of them can't afford care. So I'm not just talking about the poorest New Yorkers. I'm talking about people in the middle class. Everyone in the middle class here in New York is literally struggling to pay their childcare bills. And that's if you can find childcare. Right now, nearly all of New York City's neighborhoods are deemed childcare deserts. So if you're a working parent in the city, I want to lay out your options for you. You can go into debt, great. You can cut back your working hours or go part-time. You can drop out of the workforce entirely, or you can take your family and move out of the city, which is exactly what's happening. Families with kids ages 6 and under are twice as likely to leave the city. Call me crazy, but I think if you live in New York, you should be able to afford raising your kids in New York, right? So let me be clear. This is not just about doing what's right for working families. It's about doing what's smart for our city's economy. When families move out of the city, our tax base dwindles, so our city loses out. When families work on tighter budgets because all their money is going to childcare, they don't spend money on other things, so our small businesses lose out. In fact, in 2022, due to parents cutting their working hours, because all of their income was, dedicated to childcare costs, the city lost $23 billion. Turns out, it's expensive to not look out for working families, and it's just plain dumb. That's why I founded Moms First, the largest movement that's fighting for structural changes for working moms, including childcare and paid leave. Because as a social entrepreneur, as a women and girls activist, I like to solve problems that are standing in the way of women's freedom. And when I became a mom, I learned firsthand there is no gender equality without childcare. Let me repeat that. There is no gender equality without childcare. So over the past few years, we've made incredible strides. We've built the largest business coalition. Over 200 businesses have signed up, called the National Business Coalition on Childcare. We got over 600,000 people more childcare benefits. We vaulted childcare to the national agenda in this past election cycle. I personally got to ask Trump a question about childcare and get his response on what he's going to do about it. Another conversation for another time. But we got a commitment from both of them to reduce childcare costs. So you know what? We're going to hold them to it. All of our 40 million moms are going to hold Trump and Vance to their commitment to reducing childcare costs. But here's the thing. We can't just look to Washington to solve our problems. New York has got to lead the way. That's why we established the Marshall Plan for Moms Task Force with my friend here, Councilwoman Jennifer Gutierrez, to do that. And because of her work, because of our work, childcare is the defining issue in this year's mayoral election. My phone literally can't stop ringing. So now that we got all this attention, what are we going to do with it? First, let's set the bar high. Real high. Let's aspire to make New York City the first city in the country to implement universal childcare. Because when voters say they can't get to work because of the traffic or because things are polluted, politicians do something about it. But when parents say they can't get to work because they can't find childcare, we deserve the same respect and consideration and dignity. So to do that, we gotta build the biggest coalition, constituency of childcare voters, bipartisan childcare voters, parents and allies who are gonna hold our politicians accountable and hold them accountable. And Moms First is doing this every day, today and every day. Second, we gotta put some ideas that are just basic into action. And for an example, and this is a favorite of both Jennifer's and mine, is regulation. Here's an easy one. So right now, our city law allows infant and toddler centers to only be built on the ground floor. Why? Fire safety. But guess what? Where do our kids live? In high rises. This means this well-intentioned policy is, quite frankly, counterproductive. And so we can open up so many seats without jeopardizing their safety. This is just one of the ways that we can just rethink current childcare policy and regulation. So we've built momentum about childcare in Washington, and now we've built it in the mayoral race. And we got to keep it going all the way to the ballot box this June and this November. But to do so, we need your help. We have to demand clear, specific childcare plans from candidates. I was happy to read in the New York Times today that is happening. And every candidate is trying to actually put out a policy that is bigger, bolder than the last. I think that's exactly what we want to see. Because I'm not going to wait for another 4 years for a mayor to get this done. I'm sick of waiting. I'm quite frankly sick of seeing parents sitting at their tables trying to figure out their budgets and seeing that the numbers just don't add up. I'm sick of seeing our most talented New Yorkers just leave the city. I'm sick of us being an example of what a beacon of failure looks like. I am sick of this city being small in how it thinks about childcare, for failing to recognize that childcare is a linchpin of economic security. And so if you're sick of it too, join me. Join Moms First. Join us. Let's make New York the birthplace of the best childcare system in the country. And let's lead the way for other cities across the country and the world. Let's show them how New Yorkers do this, right? Thank you. And I know we're going to take a couple of questions now.
Second, thank you. Thank you so much, Reshma, for all the work that you do and for really setting the stage so beautifully and powerfully for this conversation and then for our panel conversation that's going to follow. And at the end, we will have opportunity for Q&A from the audience, so just keep those questions in the back of your head. So you talked about the exciting momentum that is underway in New York, and I think that is what helped us fill this room today, what has led to candidates across the board in the mayor's race putting forward child care plans, leading with child care as an issue, which is so critical. At the same time, I think there's sort of a two parts to this process, and would love to get your take on it. There's the plan itself, and then there's pushing candidates to understand where the plan ranks on their priority list.
I love that. Yep.
Because it does seem to me that if we are to do this, which we are fully capable of, creating universal child care in New York, it needs to be the #1 issue on a candidate's game plan.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that's what we learned, quite frankly, in this presidential cycle. I asked a congressperson in Washington, like, you talk about childcare, but like, where does it really rank? And she's like, all right, 13, after China, after AI. And part of that was, and which is why we ran a campaign to get childcare asked as in the presidential debate and to then secure a commitment. So I think part of the reason is like, well, why? And part of the reason why is there isn't really a constituency. All of us moms, in this room, or parents in this room, we'll go march to make sure there's guns out of our schools. We'll go march to make sure that there's climate change, but we don't march for childcare because we have internalized the fact that this is our personal problem that we have to fix. We have not seen it as a policy issue that we must demand from our government and from our employers. And so, at Moms First, we're building that. And we're really seeing the sea change of what happens, when you have a constituency that's built around that. The second thing is, I don't know about you, but I remember Mayor Adams talking a lot about what he was going to do. And, I had to beg and pray that my kid got a pre-K seat. That is abysmal. So when we do elect them on their promises and they turn out to be, abysmal failures on them, we have to make sure that we kick them out and that there's a consequence for it. And so I think, quite frankly, like it's nice and great that everyone's got all these wonderful plans on what they're going to do on childcare, but like when one of them gets elected on them, we have to make sure that we hold them accountable.
Given the work that you have done with...
Because there's nothing worse than a pissed off mom.
Oh, well...
Without childcare.
There is, and I'll just shout out Rebecca Balin in the front row, who's been organizing
doing incredible work. Thank you, Rebecca.
In New York with New Yorkers United for Childcare, and really turning parents into a political force, because it is, as you noted, like there needs to be a constituency fighting for these reforms and changes, which then leads me to ask about the business community.
Yeah.
Because so we at Five Borough have felt that if we are going to do this, the coalition needs business leaders to be at the table demanding these changes. You've been working with businesses across the country. Do they get it? Is it a hard pitch? And what are they doing to move the needle?
You know, when we built Moms First, I think the first thing when we looked at the ecosystem that was missing was building a business coalition. Like, I learned from Girls Who Code that, like, it was actually businesses way back when that were helping me build the pipeline, you know what I mean, for tech talent, because they realized that they needed more talent. And so they were the ones that, you know, paved the way. I raised $100 million, right, to teach those 700,000 girls, half of which are poor and half of which are Black and brown. So when you looked at what was happening in paid leave and childcare, one, business wasn't a partner, you know what I mean, in pushing legislation. And two, in many states where you looked where paid leave didn't pass, it was because businesses blocked it. And so we realized that we had to change that. And so, you know, we built the National Business Coalition on Childcare. We have now over 200 businesses. And what we've also done, you know, is really identify the gaps in data. You know, it's interesting, like, you know, at DE&I, I'm like, please don't someone tell me another statistic of why diversity is great, because we already know that. You know, but when it came to actually childcare, there was data missing. Like, and so we did the first ever report that proved the ROI of companies providing childcare benefits, you know, up to 425%. We found if less than 1% of employees actually take advantage of those benefits, it pays for itself. You know, so providing childcare, fixing the childcare system was just good business. And we've worked really hard with thought leadership to really change the, I cannot tell you how important it is for us to, because this is a fundamentally American thing, where we tell people that this is your problem that you have to fix. I mean, just think about the fact that, like, the school day is 8:30 to 3 and the work day is 9 to 5. How much we just don't get it. How much workplaces have never been built for parents. And so I think the importance of just presenting and shifting this conversation. No, this is an economic issue. This is not a personal problem. It's not a nice to do. It is an economic issue. So if we want to be competitive, if we want our most talented to be, you know, working in the workforce, you all got to fix this. And it's not just white-collar workers. It's, quite frankly, frontline workers. You know, and that's the next data piece that we're doing, because if you actually look at, you know, families that are working in manufacturing or retailing, you know, they're missing work because their daycare centers are shut down or their kids are sick. And so that is real costs.
Yes, no, it's all real costs, and in New York we have, I feel like there's sort of a two-pronged fight, right? So there's the policy changes that should be well within reach to fix. You gave the perfect example of restrictions on, you know, new childcare centers being forced to only open in first floor retail space, which is obviously the most expensive. And yet these things that seem like they should be easy wins still aren't getting done.
Yeah. We're not electing the right people.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, we're not electing the right people who really get it. I mean, we were joking, right? It's like, we are parents, you know, like Jennifer, your kids are all both under two, baby, and then
one is 3 and the other one is 3 months.
Yeah, mine are, you know, just turned 5 and 10. So we're in it. We're in the thick of understanding, you know, all the calculations that we have to, you know, I mean, Rebecca's about to be in it too, right? It's like, we know that it's just the struggle that every parent takes in just getting to work, and we have resources, and it's hard for us. So I think the thing is like, and oftentimes, you know, the average age in Washington is 69. You know, and most of them, quite frankly, had stay-at-home partners, so they never had to understand what it's like. And quite frankly, I do also think that there is a movement against women in this moment. You know, we are making it harder and harder and harder and harder and harder, you know, to march towards equality by taking away, you know, whether it's a pipeline program or, quite frankly, it's childcare. So I think that we got to get the right leaders, and I think that we have to get real loud and real powerful and real strong. There has to be a price that you pay, you know what I mean, in the ballot box, that when we don't support working families. And so I think the opportunity is up to us. I also think that we have to build base. I mean, one of the things that we released, we've built a tool called, are you going to talk about paid leave? I guess we can talk,
Yeah.
And we built a tool called paidleave.ai. And, because we're also we're the only wealthiest nation that doesn't have paid leave. 1 out of 4 women go back to work 2 weeks after having a baby. It's unconscionable, right? And so New York is one of the states that has paid leave. But the thing is less than 2 out of 5 people that are eligible for paid leave actually take it. So that's like $10,000. So for, again, a lot of New York families, that's a lot of money. But what happens is when you go on these government websites, you can't figure out whether you're eligible, and you just give up. Because I don't got 5 hours to sit on the phone and figure it out, talking to a rep that may not even pick up the phone. So we built a tool to change that. And so we released a report last week, and one of the things, we call this a paid leave paradox, is that paid leave is like a benefit that New Yorkers love, but it's the one that they're least taken advantage of. And so, we, using generative AI, you can actually help fix that. But one of the things that we learned in doing this report with McKinsey was that the number one constituency that wasn't taking paid leave were dads. And so I think the other opportunity that we have in this moment is to grow our alliances. This isn't just a mother's movement. This is a parent movement. This isn't just a women's issue. This is a family issue. And so we have to build constituency with men, with dads. We've done it with business at Moms First. So we have to increase the tent of people that are affected by this issue.
The tool is amazing, and I think the same challenge that exists around people not being able to access or figure out what their paid leave benefits are in New York also applies to families that are eligible for childcare vouchers. So we have these gaps in the system where families can, in theory, get financial support in many cases to help pay for childcare, but we've created so many hurdles that make it practically impossible to navigate the forms. There are all sorts of catch-22s. You can only get the subsidy if you have a job, but how do you get the job if you don't have time because you're home with your kid?
Yeah, you literally, to get paid leave in New York, you have to have your OBGYN nurse fill out a form for you. When you're having a baby, you being like, hey nurse, can you fill this out for me? I need some paid leave? No? Like, why would you create policy that way? So I also just think, and it's the same thing with pre-K seats. It's like, the excuse for cutting pre-K seats is that people aren't applying for them. Well, you're doing a really shitty job telling people that they're available to you. Why don't you go figure that out? So I just think the thing is, one of the things I've realized, and for all the activists in this room, I think this is a really important lesson I want to share, is that uptake is important. Part of what we're seeing happen in Washington by just cutting all these programs is because when we try to pass laws, we also have to build constituencies that are to make sure that these policies remain intact. So if you only have 2 out of 5 people taking advantage of paid leave, and you have someone who's trying to, find dollars, guess what they're going to cut? Paid leave. And so we got to make sure that we think about how to make our people aware that this resource is available to you and take advantage of them. And I think that, we've been playing around at Moms First a lot about our awareness campaigns and, being really successful, quite frankly, at getting to hard to reach communities. It was the same thing at Girls Who Code. When I said half those 700,000 girls, I want them to be under the poverty line, I want them to be Black and brown, we had to build an entire outreach effort to go find them. I had plenty of wealthy white and Asian girls applying to Girls Who Code. But if I wanted to have my programs filled with girls that I wanted to get this skill so they could march up into the middle class, I had to go find them. And so that is the message that people in government have to take. It is your responsibility to make sure that those constituencies and those communities know that these benefits are there for them.
Okay, last question, and then we're going to bring our panel up. Reshma, this has been amazing, and you'll be back for the Q&A too. So a call to action for everybody in this room. Everyone here cares enough about this issue that they showed up on a Thursday morning to learn more. What should people here be doing to move the ball down the field and make this a reality in New York?
Yeah, I think we all have to become childcare voters. There's a lot of things we care about, but I think when we've seen real change happen, for example, in climate, they were climate voters. They were voting on that issue, and they made that very clear. And so I think it is very important for us to kind of build a constituency around this policy and build the broadest base constituency around this policy that we actually can. I think secondly, every time we have an opportunity, if you're at the Gristettis, you know, you're at the public school and I don't know, Andrew Cuomo walks by, Zoran walks by, Brad Lander walks by, Scott Stringer walks by, ask them, what are you doing about childcare? What are you doing about childcare? What are you doing about childcare? We have to become annoying, so annoying, that quite frankly, all they're talking about is childcare. And so I think for us, having the discipline, quite frankly, and the intentionality is critical. I want to say it again, there is no gender equality without childcare, period. We are going to keep struggling to get to what we want to get the world that we want to get to for our daughters, you know what I mean, if we don't create and solve these structural problems. And childcare is number one.
Thank you. Thank you, Reshma.
Thank you,
Thanks,
guys.
everyone. Eliza Shapiro from the New York Times is going to be moderating our panel, and all of our panelists can come on up. I'll let Eliza introduce everyone.
Turn it on. Yeah, you guys can hear me. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. I just want to briefly introduce our panelists. We have Jennifer Gutierrez, who welcomed her second child 3 months ago. She is also, yay, yeah. She's also a council member representing District 34, which includes Bushwick, Williamsburg, Ridgewood. She is the leading co-prime sponsor of a bill in the council to create universal child care. Wayne Ho is the president and CEO of the Chinese American Planning Council, the country's largest Asian American social service agency, which serves over 80,000 New Yorkers in 35 locations. Aravella Simotas is the senior vice president of government affairs at REBNY, and she's a former member of the New York State Assembly representing Northern Queens. And Ana Almanzar is the Deputy Mayor of Strategic Initiatives, overseeing 9 city agencies, lots of background in local nonprofits and government, and we're so happy you're all here. So I just wanted to start with like a very quick, oh, do we need something? Oh. Great, very important question. I just want to start with a really quick lightning round. If everyone could give me basically a one-line answer to the following question. Sometimes in my reporting on childcare, I have found that people initially can think of it as like a softer issue, a mom's issue, a personal logistical issue for all of us to figure out individually. What I have come to understand is that it's really, truly one of the top existential issues for the future of New York City, and that we're kind of like staring down a pretty scary tunnel. The data and statistics are pretty frightening. I think this issue has threatened the city's economy, its workforce, it's changed its politics, it's changing our demographics, it's shaping our mayor's race, it's certainly going to shape our governor's race. So if everyone could tell me their worst case scenario, the thing that keeps you up at night, just so we can frame the stakes of this conversation, because I think it's really important. So what's the worst thing that could happen?
In one sentence?
Two.
The worst thing that could happen is that we go through another election cycle where we elect people that say we continue to not care about women. And I think something that Reshma did towards the end was say, like, we want to include men and allies in this conversation, but we can never walk away from the fact that for too long, it's been an issue on the back burner because it acutely impacts women. And not just women having babies, but women raising our babies, so their workforce as well. So the worst case scenario is that we elect, another string of representatives both at City Hall and in Albany that say we don't care about this issue enough. But hey, but I have children too. And so that would be the worst case scenario, or that I'm raising my girls in a city that is saying we don't care about you.
The worst thing that can happen, which I think we're already on this path right now with the current system, is children, especially immigrant kids, kids of color, kids with special needs, are not having the proper development and engagement. It also means that parents, working caregivers, continue to not have an equal opportunity to get jobs. It also means that our child care workers, or those who own their own businesses like family child care networks, will continue to be underpaid. And it also means that the entire economy of New York City will not be successful because we don't have working parents and others engaged. But we're already on that path right now with the status quo.
Good morning. If I had to sum it up in a sentence or two, I would say that childcare is not the #1 issue that working families talk about to each politician that they encounter. It can't be crime, it can't be the economy, it can't be inflation, it has to be childcare, specifically childcare. And the other thing that I think would be really bad is if our children don't think that we care about them, that they are the most important thing in this world. Thank you.
Good morning. I agree, I guess, with mostly everyone, few exceptions here. But the fact that I think the worst thing that can happen is for individuals and groups to believe that this is a one government issue, that it is not an entire government. I know that Reshma mentioned the federal government, the state government, and city government, to which I'm a part of, but also what you just mentioned about that our children will believe that we don't care, which is not true.
Thank you. Okay, so sounds bad. I wanted to dig in, Wayne, maybe you can get us started here. Dig into a question that I have found readers are a little bit confused about. So, how is it that childcare is so extraordinarily expensive for working families, everywhere from working class folks to upper middle class to like arguably rich people, yet childcare workers are incredibly underpaid and are often leaving centers in order to find more lucrative jobs that they may love less. So tell me about like what the strain is like on the childcare industry right now. I think we've all read a lot about late payments to providers, concerns around centers closing. Tell me where the strain is and kind of like how that equation works between it's really expensive, but the providers are not getting paid enough.
So as background, the Chinese American Planning Council, CPC, we do a lot of different work in the early childhood space. So we run our own 6 early childhood centers around the city that serves 300 plus kids, or should serve 300 plus kids. We also have family child care networks in Brooklyn, Queens, and Manhattan, working with a couple hundred providers who do family daycare. We also are one of the 4 agencies that work on Promise NYC, where we provide childcare vouchers to undocumented children, as well as being part of the Childcare Resource Center Consortium with my allies who are in the room, where we make sure that families know how to access childcare, as well as doing professional development for providers. So with our experience, we do know from the research that, and Rebecca's already gotten a shout out, New Yorkers United for Childcare, that we know that it's been costing New Yorkers in the last year $14 billion to have childcare. And we can take a look at whether or not it's affordable childcare, whether it's accessible childcare, and whether it's quality childcare. And that's where it gets to the workforce side. For us right now, and our early childhood workforce, this is my daycares, not in my family childcare networks. In my daycares, they're a unionized workforce, but we always talk about salary parity, that what my childcare staff earn and what other community-based childcare staff earn is not the same level that Department of Education teachers earn, starting salaries. Our cost of living adjustments are not as high as those. And also, you gotta imagine it from the workers' perspective. We have workers who are from the community. We're a community-based organization. Many of them were CPC kids that wanted to come back and give back to their communities. But what is happening is we get different guidance and regulations from our contracting agencies versus our licensing agencies, so they're bogged down by paperwork. They want to serve their communities, but they look at their friends or allies who have the exact same credentialing, but instead of working 12 months from 8:30 to 5:30 every day, they see their teacher friends in DOE programs, whether it's childcare programs or schools, earning more for working 10 months a year from 8:30 to 2:30. So they're at a point where they're trying to decide whether it's about serving the community that they love and care about and are part of, or looking out for their own families' livelihoods. We're also talking about all the contracting and procurement delays that you've all read about. I would acknowledge there's been some work there. I see Ana just looked at me. There has been some movement. And still, the city of New York owes my organization, if my lawyer was here, he'd remind me we were actually 10 organizations, I would put that out there. The city of New York owes CPC and our subsidiaries right now $17 million in work that we've done. In childcare alone, early childhood, our 6 centers, $2.4 million that we're still waiting for.
Do we invoice them for it?
We've
that's a
invoiced for.
contract.
Oh,
Okay.
no, well, we can talk about that. By the way, I always find it funny, I forget what their titles are, but in Department of Education, the folks that work with us are called OAs. What are OAs, Mary? Operations analysts. So in Tagalog, the Filipino language, OA means it's overly dramatic. So every time I hear OA, I'm like, yeah, it's overly dramatic, because I don't know why I jump through so many hoops to get money for work we've already done. So, I mean, I can go on and on, but I think like we have to think about, and that's just for me as a provider, where we have folks who can speak English, are trained accountants, are trained providers, and then we work with our family daycare providers who are running their own small businesses out of their house. They might, imagine if you don't speak English well, imagine you don't have the proper technology, imagine that you're trying to do outreach and you're waiting for your reimbursements while you're trying to navigate it without being able to speak the language. So this is where, yes, everything we're talking about, this is about racial justice, this is about gender justice, this is about immigrant justice, and it makes sense that why is it so hard to provide a service to our youngest New Yorkers?
So let me ask, let's talk for a minute about what government is doing, and then we're going to talk about where the private sector can help. So Jen and Ana, if you could kind of tell us what the council is doing. I know you have an incredibly ambitious bill around universal childcare, and then Ana, if you could kind of reassure us, help us on the way, what you folks are doing. So if you could, like, first, maybe Jen, you could start us off.
Thank you. So legislatively, I am the sponsor of the council's universal childcare bill, which, as you mentioned, is overly ambitious in that we've never seen something like this at the city council, right? I want to be very clear, this movement for universal childcare came long before me, right? But if I could just kind of give you the context, the bill that existed before this cohort, of which I am a part of, was one line, was create a program for universal childcare, right? And so you look at a bill like mine that's 5 pages and you're like, oh my God, that's too much ambition. It's listening to our communities. We built a coalition before we ever even introduced it of childcare providers, some of who are in this room. Shout out to the coalition en Nuestros Niños. Many of our think tanks and our nonprofits in the city, New Yorkers United for Childcare. We had these thorough conversations with folks about what would a universal childcare system look like in the city. And yes, it was about providing childcare. It was about including 0 to 5, so being very clear on who we're talking about and who we want to serve. It's also being inclusive, saying that it includes everyone regardless of income and regardless of immigration status. And I can't stress that part enough, especially now in this climate, that it will continue to be so crucial to any universal childcare program in the country, not just New York City. And that also that we were talking about the workers. Wayne touched on pay parity, but we want to talk about their infrastructure. This is a dignified profession. And for almost every year that these programs have been in existence, we don't treat them as such. And it's not just that we're not paying them on time, close to every year and throughout most administrations, we're threatening them, saying, your site might not be open next year. So even just the narrative of we might not have enough dollars to keep it open, this is too expensive, you're serving in a gentrified community, which that is the fault of leaders before us. That is, that's not the community's fault, and yet we're the ones suffering the most. So the bill is ambitious, but it's actually a complete reflection of the service that New Yorkers need. And so we built this coalition. We haven't been doing it alone. We had a hearing, and it calls for all these things. It calls for an Office of Childcare. It calls for a plan. It calls for reassessing after several years. It calls for a partnership with multiple agencies like the Department of Health, for example. Let's look at the trends. Where are people birthing? What hospitals are families having their babies in? What are their professions? It really is asking for a comprehensive look at what needs to happen before we actually roll out universal childcare. And so we had a hearing. I'm one of the members, along with the chair of the Education Council Committee, Councilmember Rita Joseph, part of an early childhood roundtable, along with the deputy mayor. I think this year's budget was a real testament of like a commitment to partner both the council and the administration on specifically early childhood. You all are here, you all know the 3K fight, and I think that's like the buzzword, and it's important that we continue to talk about 3K, but under early childhood education is UPK, is the special education seats, it's extended day, it's outreach. It was a lot, it is a lot, and so I just wanna give credit to those folks in the room and in the space that have been fighting for that. So on the government side, I would say I kind of wake up like a Groundhog Day every day where I'm like, oh, we still haven't done this. And it's slow moving, and it's so much slower than I would like. But we have this bill. We are, like Reshma touched on, every single mayor is talking about it. I also get calls, and I'm going to be, watching and hopefully supporting the candidate that I think is the most serious. The candidate that is not just willing to say we have a plan, but these are our commitments. Because every year we do have these commitments of education, but there's just a level of inactivity that doesn't move fast enough, right? We can't tell people to stop procreating until we get our shit together. It's just not realistic.
So Ana, maybe you could just tell us a little bit about kind of your office's top initiatives, and then correct the record on anything that you think is misunderstood or outdated about how we're talking about 3K or seats or any of this.
Can I start with Wayne? Well, and I got to say, I understand, I hear the pay parity issue, but in the nonprofit side, I think we have done a disservice to the administration by now mentioning the $741 million that this administration secured for nonprofits in general for payment on the quota. Just to set the record straight on there, Wayne. Thank you for giving me credit. We have the city administered largest child care and early childhood programs in the entire country. We have 150,000 children who are receiving an early education because of this administration and the work that has been done in the last 4 years, or in the last 2 years and change. Today, we have increased access to AC vouchers by 700%. The pause is meant to be a pause. 700%. We have increased the number of applications and offers that we make from 19,000 in 2022 to 43,000 in 2024, plus 10,000 for those who applied after the deadline. We built the first Office of Child Care and Early Childhood Education system. And that office, thanks to the advocacy from the council and from Councilmember Gutierrez and Chair Joseph, along with the work that the administration has done, built the office and brought 3 lines that are now paid with city tax levy for the office, an executive director, a policy person, and an operations person, along with 2 other staff that we have in that office. So 5 individuals dedicated to paying attention to everything that happens around the city, ACS, HRA, DOH that was mentioned earlier, and New York City Public Schools. I know there's a question that was brought up earlier about second floor and allowing it for the permit. That is something that we're working together with REBNY in looking at different aspects of the permitting system to be able to allow for that. Now, let's think about this. When you have a 0 to 2-year-old, you need 2 arms to carry that child out of a burning building. Downstairs, right? So the physical aspect of that is serious, and we take that. The safety of our children, and I know that the system, whenever something happens, the system constrained, and it takes us a while to sort of relax it and go back to normal, but we are looking at every single aspect of that. Also, earlier I mentioned the need to work with the federal government and the state. At the state, we put forward 2 advocacy pieces last year. One was, and Reshma mentioned it, it was decoupling the hours that you work and the salary that you make, and then removing the floor of your wage. This is just impossible thing that seems to be so simple. We went to the governor's office. We've been pushing for it for 2 consecutive years since I started. We have not been able to get her to sign that bill, but we'll go at it again this year. And this year, because we have made that increase, and that's thanks to the work that every single city staff member who's at ACS has dedicated their life and the last year alone to increase that 700% increase in the voucher application and approval. We have to go back to the state and ask them, hey, look at what we have spent and what we need in order to make the match to continue the same rate of growth that we have to give family access to an affordable childcare through the voucher system. When it comes to the family childcare network, that is a subject that is very, very, very close to my heart, because I know that most people like me, people who come to this country from somewhere else, many of them women of color, find themselves in a way to make a living, or half of a living, one will say, through the childcare, the family childcare network. And we are working very closely with that. I understand and I live the pain. I get to the office every morning at 7:15. I don't leave until 8 or 9 o'clock, because to me, the point that Wayne brought regarding the payment is embarrassing, point blank. We can do better, and we are doing better. We have every summer towards the end of the year, we get a coalition of workers from New York City Public Schools and City Hall to go and get on the phone twice a day to look at every voucher that has come in, every single one invoice that has come in, how many have we processed, and how many have we paid, and how can we do that better and faster. That's my commitment on the payment on childcare. We also built a childcare advisory group, part of the 10-point plan that we designed with the City Council, to bring providers, both the largest, like Wayne and his organization, UNH, as well as organizations that had a poor experience with the city and the city payment system. One young lady in particular, and I know Marcia is here. Marcia, I won't leave you out. I know she's, Marcia? Marcia, I'll pronounce it in Spanish. Marcia, who's also part of our advisory group, looking into the system. What are we doing well? And there's a lot of things that we're doing well, and what we can fix. And one of the providers that we brought in to help us figure out how we can do this better is a young family child care provider in the Bronx who had a payment issue with us back last summer. And we know that she understands, because she had a challenge. She can help us understand on the back end how we can make that fix. But if we were to keep 2 things from today, from my remarks today, one will be our increase to 700% increase on ACS vouchers, and also that we're running 150,000 childcare seats throughout the entire system, and that we made 53,000 offers for 3K last year alone, and we are moving up to keep up that rate, as well as opening 1,000 seats for our Promise New York, Promise NYC program for our undocumented and other families who might not have access to childcare, as well as the work that we have done with the Division of, I'm looking at you, Shahira, the Division of Inclusive and Accessible Learning, DIAL, I know the DIAL, in making sure that the challenges that we faced last year, and I know that our friend at the end of the hall, she wrote about it, quite frankly, a lot. The 700 seats that were needed, that we got that number for our student with special need, and opening more classroom as we continue the work that we do on our bi-weekly meetings with the members from council and the chair as well. And I want to go mute now, just
Thank you. That is really helpful. So I want to obviously bring in now, we've talked about the government side, let's bring in the business community. So Aravella, I would love if you could kind of start us off thinking, how can business leaders help, and tell us a little bit about REBNY's work with DC 37, and then I would love for everyone to talk about if you had an ask or a hope or a dream from the business community, people gathered here, what's on your wish list? So we'll start off.
Of course. Let me just give you a little bit of background on REBNY. We are one of the oldest trade associations in New York City, representing real estate interests. Part of our membership are the developers, and we are the advocacy arm for them. We also represent the brokers. And what we care about is making sure not only that child care is available for New Yorkers, but there's a place for it to happen, because the truth is, if you don't have well built out centers, you can't take care of the children. You have to make sure that they're safe, that they're reliable, that they're accessible, that there are no child care deserts in New York City. As Reshma told us, that almost every almost every neighborhood in New York City has one. So we have to make sure that the policies are in place that incentivize these centers to be built. B, that they are safe and accessible, and that we make sure that people are accountable if they're not built. How this happens in New York City is they provide tax credits for owners to actually build out these centers. I could tell you that I serve on the board of my local Greek Orthodox church, and we actually are housing a center in one of our buildings. And again, you're given a tax credit to make sure that this becomes a reality. Thankfully, the governor, the tax credit in New York State is expiring soon, and it is in the governor's budget for it to continue. We have to make sure that it increases, because we have to make sure that more centers like this are built. I mean, a property owner is going to look at their space, and they're in the business of making money, but they also have goodwill. They want to provide the spaces for their employees, for their, for New Yorkers, for their neighbors, and they want to build out these centers, and it has to just make sense, financial sense for them to do so. We have partnered with DC 37 and with 39 other wonderful organizations. Our most recent member to join our coalition is the Greater New York City YMCA, and it's to really make sure that we push Albany, we push New York City to expand these child property tax credits, to again make sure that this happens. I could tell you, as a former legislator myself, tax credits can be a dirty word. In Albany, we talk about it sometimes, and sometimes people don't understand why we should be providing these things. The truth is that with respect to childcare, we're providing them to make sure that the centers are available, that there are adequate spaces, as you mentioned, safe spaces. And also we have to make sure that government works together, so it doesn't take 100 years to coordinate an inspection or to get a permit. We have to make sure that government's working together. Department of Health, Department of Buildings. There's a whole acronym. There's like an alphabet soup of acronyms that sometimes we have to deal with. But again, it's about providing these places for the child care to actually happen. And how can the public center help? I think that my members want to do their part to provide the spaces to allow for this very, very critical service to be provided for New Yorkers.
And yeah, if everyone could just give us like a 1 or 2 line wish list, whether it's philanthropy, real estate, like what can the private sector do to help? I feel like there's a huge need and a huge opportunity, so what's on your wish list?
I think, and part of my coalition has been, we've had a couple of roundtables with the private sector, many tech companies that are really taking this matter into their own hands by providing vouchers. I think it is the one thing that I would say is certainly giving the private sector space to kind of build this out, but doing it in partnership with government. It is the only way that it's going to be universal. It is the only way that we're going to really cement it into perpetuity if we're working in this hand in hand. So the coalition is great. I remember the announcement came out. I read about it and I said, I don't know why someone didn't contact me if I'm the sponsor. And I think moving forward, it would be great to continue the conversation with council, with the administration, and with the coalition, because it really is going to take everyone, and it's going to take every interested party in building this out in a way that is completely universal, so that we have equity in childcare, and that we're reforming the industry. Thank you.
For employers, if they can just pick up Reshma's agenda, that'd be cool. For philanthropy, don't change your mind every 2 years on what you're funding. And then say we have to be off for 2 years and then come back with a new idea. Don't do that. For us, I think it's important to think about new developments. If the city can have rules and laws around X percentage of affordable housing must go towards formerly unhoused, if X percentage go towards local folks, then what can we do in economic development projects to make sure when we talk about community facility, is like, let's talk about childcare facilities. I do want to acknowledge two of my childcare heads are here, Mary and Judy are here. One of our childcare centers operates out of a NYCHA facility. I can show you the emails since winter started. Every other day, every third day, leaks, overflows, because we're on the first floor of one of the NYCHA buildings, the overflows of the garbage in the recycling room, which is not safe for the kids, not safe for my workers. And especially then when we have to close that day and wait for NYCHA to come in, then we're talking about working parents who can't work, many of which who are engaged in the child welfare system, so they need to work and demonstrate for them, just given that's part of their plan and their case management plan. So having nice, clean facilities would be important. So not just new facilities, but if there's opportunities for the private sector to invest in local partners and help upkeep our facilities, would be an amazing thing. Just really quickly to the deputy mayor, since we're friends, I just want to break this. Yes. I always throw that out there. I'm like, I know. I'm like, we're friends. You want to pay for my drinks? So yes, I want to acknowledge that this mayor did invest money for a cost of living adjustment for human services nonprofit workers, more than was ever done under the previous mayors. The previous governor of New York, in his 12 whatever years that he was there, never followed through on the state level statute. There was a law that said you had to pay for a cost of living adjustment for human services workers. So I do acknowledge the governor did invest too. But I think a key thing to note is nonprofit human services workers earn 30% less than their government counterparts with the same titles and same educational backgrounds. So yes, a cost of living adjustment was a true investment, and we all celebrated and stood with the mayor and the city council when they did that. But it's important to note that we're starting from behind already. So even in daycare, which is once again a unionized workforce, so it's a separate negotiation, it's interesting when we as the employers are saying, pay more, charge us more, pay us more, so that we can pay our workers more, because we believe in that, and that's what our workers deserve. So I think oftentimes it feels like us in the nonprofit contracted, because we're contracted to do the work that many cities do themselves for social services, that we feel like a training ground for city jobs, where every 2 to 3 years, my staff are leaving, because if they're my child welfare staff, they already know what's going on. They'll go to ACS. My educators in after school or daycare will go to DOE. I can go down the line. My affordable housing staff going over to HPD or HRA. So I think it's important to note that, yes, the investment's great, but it's not getting us to parity, which is what the council member talked about.
Let me begin by saying, council member, I will be on the phone with you either later today or tomorrow. I just started in this role about 6 months ago, so I'm looking forward to working with you. As a mom myself, I hear you. And I also want to say that you're right. As a former policymaker, it is a shame that we don't pay our service providers what they deserve. What we need in childcare is accessibility, right? Affordability and reliability. And if our service providers are leaving because, not that they want to leave, but because they might have a better opportunity elsewhere to provide for their families, and we can do something about it, we need to, we must. I think what the private sector can certainly do is continue to, beat at the door of City Hall, at Albany, and the federal government to make sure that we have access to the financial resources that we need to create a good child care system. But 2, education. We have to educate our employees, we have to educate our neighbors, we have to educate constituents, we have to make sure that everybody understands that this is a problem and that there are solutions, and that the mayor's office and city council is working very hard to correct it, but we have to make sure that those who we elect, as Reshma said, stay accountable. We have to make sure that we ask them when you see, the mayoral candidate in the street, you ask them about childcare, and that you hold them accountable. So it's not just the election goes by and then you forget about it. We have to make sure that this coalition is not only created, but it thrives, and that it's not just this year, but it goes in perpetuity. And that's how this issue will stay at the front of mind to policymakers. Thank you.
two things. First, I want to acknowledge and thank our partners in the philanthropic world, specifically Robin Hood Foundation. I see our friends here, for allowing us to innovate and to pilot some programs across the city that we can then start thinking and having a conversation with our budget director, negotiation with the council on how we can then pay for that with city tax levy. Second, and that partnership is most important, because that is something that the city not always can do in terms of having to pilot something new, and having philanthropy to allow us to do that is just fantastic. And two is the advocacy, as she mentioned, regarding the state level and what we need from the state in terms of both adjusting those regulations to allow more families to access affordable childcare, as well as financially being able to provide more funding for the city so we can continue our growth for the ACS vouchers of that 700% increase.
Thank you so much.
Oh, and one more thing, sorry. The business tax credit that is available, and it will close on November 1st of 2025, that for them to take advantage of them, for them to visit our toolkit that speaks about how it is important that they are also a partner in childcare provision and being able to allow the workers one more flexible hours, to providing also benefits for childcare in-house, that we can partner with them in opening and being able to regulate as well. And one last thing, I know I said a lot, but one last thing, I know, and we understand the challenges that we face regarding all the agencies that are involved in opening a child care center. We are working with our chief efficiency officer, looking into those challenges and seeing how we can streamline to make sure that not only on the business side, but also before a child care becomes a business, how can we help them open the doors at a quicker, more faster rate. Thanks.
Thank you. This is so helpful. I think we have time for a few questions, maybe.
Any questions, Rebecca? There's a mic coming to you. Oh, and Reshma, please join the panelists up there. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Balin, Executive Director of New Yorkers United for Childcare. We organize parents and would-be parents to win universal childcare.
Grandparents.
And grandparents, who are parents, technically. And people who never want kids but are sick of their friends leaving the city. We organize them all. It's so true. Where was I going with that? Oh yeah. So we organize families to win universal childcare. And one thing I felt was missing from this conversation, incredible conversation, was talking about protecting and expanding the universal childcare that New York City already has. And to Reshma's point, New York City can and has built incredible things. And my question is mostly for the deputy mayor, but anyone who would like to answer, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how expanding and protecting the universal childcare that we already have plays into the economy. And just for some context, we know 2-year-olds are they don't have enough access to childcare. They are not accessing the vouchers that they desperately need, and it's very complicated to apply for them. And then, of course, if you make just a little bit too much money, you don't apply for them at all. Meanwhile, the parents we organize are very concerned that they won't even get a 3K seat, right? Pre-K is pretty much established, but universal 3K, a promise for all New Yorkers, is not. There was 2,000 parents who last year did not receive a seat and were waitlisted through September, had to put in thousands of dollars of deposit money, and sometimes full tuition, because they didn't have another option. And the commissioner at Chair Rita Joseph's hearing recently said there was no plan to add more 3K seats, even though there were 2,000 people waitlisted last year. So again, I'm curious how you see protecting and expanding the universal child care we already have as critical to our economy. Thank you.
See how I can get in some serious trouble, right? By acknowledging the language. We understand the how the conversation goes into universal childcare, but what we are aiming to do is to expand what we can, and we did last year. expand those 10,000 seats. We added $20 million to the budget in order for us to be able to make those extra 10,000 offers to the 3K application that we initially had, beyond the 43,000 that we had from the deadline of the application attempt that happened in early this summer. We are looking at the application that we'll get for 2025, and we'll go from there. It is hard, and I know that you said 2,000 families weren't able to have access to a seat. We have made a promise that every family who needs a seat will have access to a seat. One of the many good things that we do is that we give families choice, and that means that you can apply, and I know it's complicated, I know, that we can apply for childcare for the 3K specifically, and have multiple choice where you would like to send your child to. And then that family has to make an active, intentional decision to accept that seat. So then we can release the rest of the one. Oh, she's smiling suspiciously. I don't think I'm answering the question. For us to release those seats for another family to then be able to take advantage of that open seat before we pass the deadline, and the family will have to make the $10,000 that you mentioned, a deposit for another child care. So if we want to give family freedom and options, right, we're going to have to make adjustments somewhere else, because we are working, unfortunately, with very limited resources. And again, we're just going to ask the state to help us alleviate some of that pressure, specifically assessing the ACS vouchers. Thank you for that question.
Just quickly to add to that, I think there has been great expansion, but I think we know that the vision is not just about 4-year-olds, it's not just about a few 3-year-olds, but we want a vision where it's a continuum from 0 to 5. And before I joined CPC 8 years ago, my daughter went to CPC daycare for 3s and 4s, and then my son went to a DOE program for his 3 and 4. So I personally know the value. This is like Hair Club for Men. Like I'm not just a CEO. I'm the client. By the way, because of this job, I used to have hair like Jen before I joined CPC, and this is what you get now. After
You were taking prenatals too?
Yeah, I was. It was awesome. But I think part of it is like our vision is for having a true 0 to 5 system, and I just want to emphasize some of the numbers, which again, due to their work, it cost $14 billion to have childcare, to access childcare for New Yorkers in the last year. But we also know that it cost the city $23 billion in economic activity for folks who could not access childcare or don't have childcare. So the economic reasons are there alone. And I see Greg Morris from New York City Employment and Training Coalition has been doing a lot of work on this. And we know it's about caregiving, not just for kids, but it's also for our elders that we need so people can work in the city of New York. Just quickly on the expansion has been good, and policies and funding is good, but we need to make sure on the ground it's reaching the communities. And that's where going through the ACS voucher system, while it's increased, we have families telling us it's taking 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks in order to get a turnaround, just to wait for them to go through the system in order for them to take a spot. And also, when things got centralized over the DOE on enrollment, it often feels, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but it often feels that there's just a lot more kids being routed or referred to or placed at DOE daycare centers versus community-based daycare centers, especially when our reimbursements are based on attendance. So if there's delays in vouchers and there's not equitable assignments to our community-based centers, and you're holding me accountable to enrollment, and then you're gonna pay me and reimburse me based on enrollment, but I still have to follow through on my collective bargaining agreement and pay my workers, there's a gap that has to be filled there.
Can I just add one tiny little thing to your question, Rebecca? And I think I would just be a poor representative if I didn't mention this, which earlier this year there was an announcement of about 5 daycare centers, and it's a lot more. There's a lot of nuances. I want to say it was not just like a very a community center that was shut down. But this announcement of, not allowing these centers to enroll their students in 3K, for me in my district, it's Nuestros Niños, which has been a pillar in the South Side for over 50 years, and Deputy Mayor Almanzar has been working very closely, as well as the Deputy Chancellor on this, and I want to say, there's been a slight kind of like temporary solution to this problem, but there really needs to be, and I know you agree with me here, there needs to be a long-term vision and implementation of a plan for these nonprofit child-based or early education centers, especially ones that have family childcare networks. And I'll tell you why, because it is completely an economic, like Reshma said, advantage. These are community centers that are employing majority women and women of color, immigrant women, that are able to work from home, that are themselves oftentimes raising their own children as they're working from home. And these are centers that are really, in a community, in a district like mine that's gentrifying in the south side of Williamsburg, everybody that has left knows Nuestros Niños. And I know that I'm like trying to tug at a heartstring that may or may not exist in this room, but you all have to see the value in culture, in community identity, in these institutions. And something that the city has not done great, not just now, but ever, is really thinking about these institutions and kind of the planning that needs to happen. And what has happened up until now is there's been kind of these like long-term leases with these private landlords. And I would love to kind of come together to think about long-term, because not every landlord, like you said, is, not every landlord is like, oh my God, I would love these cuddly children in my neighborhood, right? In communities like Williamsburg, like Bushwick, like the Lower East Side, like Chinatown, that have seen so much displacement, they're at risk. And the city is saying the same thing. The city is saying like some of these landlords want $1 million, and it's becoming too costly. And there has to be a value in the identity of these communities that have kind of set the tone, that have an infrastructure that works, because these are women that would be losing jobs. These are women that would be not going to work because these centers are closing. So I just wanted to throw that in there. Thank you.
Ken, I just real quick, I'm so sorry. And thank you, Councilmember, for bringing that up. The challenges that we face is that Wayne mentioned the work that New York City Public Schools does in recruiting, right? And perhaps not the best recruiting mechanism. In partnership with the council, what we did this year is to build a outreach and enrollment campaign, and we listened carefully to what both Councilmember Gutierrez and Councilmember Chair Joseph said about, if we are going to do this outreach and enrollment campaign, we have to make sure that those we bring to the table are those who are going to benefit from that work. And we did this past 2 weeks ago, we did a 5 BORO tour, bringing our resources to many communities and childcare providers to help them enroll and engage with families throughout the entire city. In terms of the challenges that we face with city-owned leases, is that those properties and those landlords are seeing the changes in their community and taking advantage of the increases that they can bring in rent. In some of the examples that the council member mentioned of those 5 child care centers across the city, 3 of them in Brooklyn, or 4 of them in Brooklyn, we're faced with the challenge of having to negotiate a lease that was starting at one price, and then want to multiply it for by more like 50% of the cost that we were paying. And some of them wanted retroactive pay for God knows how long, that it was just unattainable. Thankfully, and thanks to the work that the Deputy Chancellor and the council member and many advocates did, we're able to work with those landlords and have, yes, a temporary solution for an issue that is going to be a long-term, that we have to sit down with the community, with the provider and the landlord to find a long-term solution. On top of that, we know that we have to RFP the entire system comes next year if we're able to. And that's that.
Thank you so much. That was such a rich response to that great question that we are at time, or you have one more? Leah, are you raising your hand? I think we're